The frost had killed 3 travelers on the road to Marrowfen that night, and Sabrina would have been the 4th. She stumbled through the iron gates just as the last lantern in the watchtower was being snuffed out, her lips blue, her fingers locked into claws around the empty satchel that had once held everything she owned. The wind off the hollow pass cut through her thin dress like a blade made of glass. She could no longer feel her feet. She could no longer feel her face. She could no longer remember with any certainty why she had been running. Only that she could not stop. The watchman who saw her crossed himself and pointed toward the courtyard of the old chapel house, where a fire had been lit for travelers. And he muttered something about the mercy of the old gods before turning his back to her. There were perhaps a dozen souls already gathered. None of them moved to make room. She did not blame them. There was little enough warmth to share, and she was a stranger with the look of trouble on her. She was not supposed to be here. She was supposed to be in the convent at St. Wilfra's, copying scripture by candlelight, forgotten. That had been the bargain her aunt had struck the night her mother died. The night Sabrina had been bundled into a cart and sent to nuns who whispered behind her back about the silver streak in her dark hair. The strangeness of her eyes, the way the convent dogs would not enter any room she occupied. Instead, she was kneeling in a strange town 300 miles from anywhere she had ever been, with a price on her head and a memory of a woman screaming her real name down a stone corridor. She coughed, and the sound that came out of her chest was wet and wrong. She had perhaps an hour before her body stopped trying to save itself. "Child." The voice came from behind her, low and rasped. The firelight caught the face of an old man crouched at the edge of the courtyard, half hidden behind a stack of firewood. He was wrapped in 3 layers of patched wool. His beard was the color of wet ash. And across his shoulders, draped like a second skin, was a cloak. A cloak unlike anything she had ever seen. It was the deep, drinking black of a starless sky, and along its edges ran a thin line of silver thread, stitched in a pattern she could not quite make her eyes settle on. A wolf, perhaps? Or a tree? Or a name written in a language her mind refused to read. Even from across the courtyard, the cloak seemed to give off a faint warmth that the fire itself could not match. "You are dying, child," the old man said softly. "I can see it on you. The cold has gone past your blood. It is in your bones now." She tried to answer. Her teeth would not unclench. He watched her with eyes that were a pale washed gold, the color of frost on the inside of a window. Then, slowly, he unclasped the silver pin at his throat and let the black cloak slide from his shoulders. "Take it. For tonight only. You will give it back at first light, and you will not wear it past the gates of this town, and you will not tell a single soul where you came by it. It is only a loan, just to see you through till morning." She nodded and lifted her arm so he could drape the heavy black wool across her shoulders. The moment the cloak settled against her, the cold inside her chest broke. It was not warmth, exactly. It was deeper than warmth, as if something inside the cloak itself recognized her and was working to keep her alive. Her teeth stopped chattering, her vision steadied. And beneath the silver embroidery, against her cheek, she caught a faint and impossible scent. Wolf smoke, cedar, snow, the scent of a living person, even though the cloak felt as though it had not been worn in a very long time. "Sleep, child," the old man whispered, "until first light. Then bring it back, and we will pretend that none of this ever happened." She slept. She did not see the old man's pale gold eyes fix on the gate at the far end of the square. She did not see, an hour past midnight, the slow approach of riders along the frost-glazed road. 6 men in dark mail with the sigil of the crownwood riveted across their breastplates, and at their head, on a horse the color of midwinter dusk, a man whose face was hidden beneath a deep iron-gray hood. She did not see him rein his horse to a sudden, violent halt. She did not see him swing down without a word to his men. She did not see him walk into the ring of firelight until he stood directly over the sleeping girl and looked down at the black cloak draped across her shoulders. She did not see his face, beneath the hood, go absolutely still. But the old man behind the firewood saw. He lowered his head and whispered very softly, "Forgive me, my king. I had to." She was dying. The man in the iron-gray hood did not answer. He only stared down at the sleeping girl and the cloak she wore, and slowly reached out one gauntleted hand toward the silver embroidery, as if he could not entirely believe what he was seeing. His fingers stopped a breath away from the wool. They were trembling. The first thing Sabrina knew, when she woke, was that she was no longer cold. The second thing she knew was that someone was watching her. She did not open her eyes. She had learned, in the hard years before the convent, that opening one's eyes too quickly was a thing that got people killed. Instead, she lay very still and listened. The fire had burned to embers. A bell was ringing the hour before dawn. And very near, the slow, controlled breathing of a man who was not asleep. A man who had not been there when she had closed her eyes. She opened her eyes a fraction. He was crouched on the flagstones beside her, perhaps an arm's length away, very tall, broader through the shoulders than any man she had ever seen at close quarters, in black mail beneath a deep iron-gray cloak. His face was hidden beneath the hood. She could only see the line of his mouth, set in the absolute, motionless patience of a wolf at the mouth of a den. He was waiting for her to wake. Her blood turned to water. Every instinct she had ever possessed was screaming the same word. Run. She could not run. So she closed her eyes again and let herself become the small, dying thing he had presumably crouched beside out of pity, and not the thing she truly was. A girl with a price on her head and a name she had not spoken aloud in 7 years. Then, very softly, in a voice that was lower than thunder and quieter than snowfall, he spoke. "I know you are awake." She did not answer. "I am not going to hurt you. I am not going to take you anywhere. I am not going to ask you your name. I only want to ask you one question, and then I will leave you." Her throat had closed. "The cloak you are wearing. Where did you get it?" She did not move. "I will not punish whoever gave it to you. I give you my word on the blood of my mother, and that is an oath I have not given to any living soul in 12 years. Only tell me, please." It was the please that almost broke her. It was a word that did not belong in the mouth of a man in mail. She turned her head. An old man. By the firewood. He said it was alone. He went absolutely still. Describe him. Old. White beard. Patched wool. His eyes were the color of frost. He made a sound that was not quite a word and not quite a breath. The sound a man might make if a knife had been put through him in a place he had thought was already healed. His head turned slowly toward the firewood. It was empty. No patched wool. No chipped wooden cup. No sign that anyone had ever sat there at all. Only a small dark mark on the flagstones, where something might have rested for a long time. "Of course he did," he said softly. "Of course he did. I will give it back," she whispered. She fumbled at the silver pin at her throat. Her cold, stiff fingers shook. A gauntleted hand closed gently over hers. "No. Keep it until the dawn," as he asked. Through the steel of the gauntlet she could feel that his hand was shaking too. "What is your name, girl?" "Wren," she said at last, choosing the name of a bird that had nested in the eaves of the convent. He gave a short, soundless breath. "Wren. Of course it is." He rose in a single fluid motion that did not look like the movement of a man in mail at all, but rather the unfolding of something far older and far more dangerous. "Sleep, Wren. No one in this town will trouble you tonight. I give you my word on that as well." He took 3 steps, then he stopped, without looking back. If you should see the old man again, would you tell him something for me? Yes, she whispered. Tell him I have not forgiven him, but I am glad he is alive. Then he walked out of the firelight, and his men closed silently around him, and the 6 dark riders of the Crownwood vanished back into the road from which they had come. She did not see, 3 streets away, behind the shutter of an upper window, a pale, beautiful woman who had been watching the figure in the iron-gray hood ride out of the square. She did not see the woman turn, her mouth pressed into a thin white line, and say to the man behind her, in a voice as smooth and cold as a knife passed across silk. He stopped, in the chapel courtyard. Find out why. Find out who. And do it before he returns to the capital. By the time the dawn came, the cloak was still across Sabrina's shoulders. The old man had not returned for it, and she was already being hunted. It took Sabrina 4 days to reach the village of Holt on the Marsh, and by then she had stopped trusting her own reflection. She had meant to give the cloak back. She had asked every traveler, every merchant, every priest who passed through Marrowfen. No one had seen an old man in patched wool with frost-colored eyes. One of the bone-thin children had finally tugged at her sleeve and whispered that she had been alone by the fire from the moment she arrived. So she had folded the cloak into the bottom of her satchel and walked. Each night, when the cold grew sharp, she had slipped it across her shoulders for an hour or two, and each time the impossible warmth had come, and the wolf smoke cedar snow scent had risen against her cheek, and she had thought of the trembling hand in the steel gauntlet and the voice saying, "Wren, of course it is." By the 4th night, she had begun to dream, running through a great hall lit with 1,000 candles, a voice calling her real name from the far end of a corridor she could not reach, 2 heartbeats in her chest, her own and another, slower one, beating just behind her ribs as if it had always been there, and she had only now learned to listen for it. She would wake with her hand pressed against the center of her chest and try not to think the thought that kept circling at the edges of her mind, that something inside her had been asleep her whole life and was beginning, very quietly, to wake. Holt on the Marsh was a sodden, half-forgotten place at the edge of a dying river. The miller's wife had broken her wrist the week before, and the miller took one look at Sabrina's clean hands and quiet manner and asked no questions. She gave her name as Wren. The lie came out with surprising ease. For 9 days she lived as Wren the miller's helper, and tried to convince herself she had imagined everything. On the 10th morning, the miller's youngest daughter came running into the kitchen with a strip of folded paper. For Wren. The man at the gate said it was for Wren, a traveler with a wolf on his coat. Sabrina opened the paper with fingers that had begun to tremble. The cloak is not yours to wear. Bring it to the old shrine north of the village before the moon turns. Come alone, or others will come, and they will not ask. There was no signature. There was no need. She slipped the paper into the front of her dress and smiled at the child. Thank you, sweetling. Run along now. The child ran. Sabrina stood very still and pressed one hand to the center of her chest. The second heartbeat was there, not faintly, beating, slow and steady and not hers, just behind her ribs, in perfect counterpoint to her own racing pulse. And as she stood there listening to it, 2 things became cold and final. The man in the iron-gray hood had not been hunting her. He had been protecting her. And someone else had been watching the chapel courtyard. Outside the kitchen window, through the gray curtain of the rain, she caught a small movement at the edge of the marsh road. A tall, slender shape in a dark cloak, standing very still beneath the bare branches of a hawthorn. As she watched, the figure lifted one hand and pointed 2 fingers directly at the kitchen window, directly at her. Then it stepped back into the trees and was gone. Sabrina did not finish the stew. She climbed the ladder to the loft, dragged out her satchel, and drew out the cloak. The black wool spilled across her lap like water at midnight. She pressed her face into it. Wolf smoke, cedar, snow. The scent was stronger than it had been 4 days ago, as if the cloak itself was waking up alongside whatever was waking inside her. The second heartbeat answered the scent at once, and she understood that the heartbeat she had been hearing was not in her body at all. It was in the cloak, or in something the cloak was tethered to. Wren? The miller's voice came from below. The little one says you had a letter. Are you well? She had spent 9 nights under this man's roof. He had given her bread and a bed. If she stayed, the watcher would come for her here. She could not stay. I am well, she called down. Word from the convent. They are sending a sister to fetch me. I must go to meet her on the road. I will be back before the supper bell. A clean lie. She hated herself a little for how readily it came. She folded the cloak, placed it at the bottom of her satchel, and took the side door behind the grain store, stepping out into the rain. She had been walking for a quarter of an hour when she realized she was not alone on the road. There was no sound, but she had spent her childhood in the kind of household where one learned, very young, to feel the weight of being watched. There was a pressure between her shoulder blades, the same awareness a deer feels at the edge of a clearing when it has not yet seen the dogs. She kept walking, and let her right hand drift to the bone-handled paring knife she had taken from the miller's kitchen. The road bent. The marsh closed in on either side. Lady, the voice came from in front of her. A figure stepped out from behind the trunk of an old alder a dozen paces ahead, shorter, broader, a heavy traveler's cloak the color of damp moss, a sword belt under it that he had not bothered to hide. His face was unremarkable in the way faces are unremarkable when their owner has spent a long time learning to be forgotten. Lady, stand still. Do not turn. There are 2 of them behind you. You will not outrun them. Who are you? She whispered. A friend, or as near to one as you are likely to find on this road tonight. My name is Kadrin. The one behind the firewood sent me. The world tilted. He is alive then. He is alive, and he has been watching over you, in his own way, since the moment you walked into Merofen. He cannot come himself. He is being hunted as hard as you are. Harder. The men behind you are not common cutthroats, and you are not a common kitchen girl. You have perhaps 3 minutes, so I would ask you to do exactly as I say. And what is that? When I count to 3, drop to your knees, scream, then lie still. Do you understand? She nodded. 1. The wet sound of a boot, 15 paces behind her now. 2. A small metallic whisper from behind, not from Kadrin. 3. She dropped and screamed, and over her head something passed with a sound like a bird made of wire. There was a wet, surprised grunt behind her. Then a second one. Then the soft, terrible thump of a body hitting the road. She pressed her face into the mud. She heard footsteps. She heard a small, brutal, businesslike sound she did not allow herself to identify. She heard the soft scrape of something being dragged off the road and into the alders. Then Kadrin's voice, very close to her ear. You may rise now, lady. She rose. She did not look behind her. Kadrin had a thin slash across the back of his right hand. He did not seem to notice. Lady. He told me you were brave. He did not tell me how brave. There will be more of them. By tomorrow at sundown, this stretch of road will be crawling with the lady's men. We cannot stay near Holt. I have a place. Half a day into the marsh, a hunter's hut. No one alive knows of it except the one who sent me. Will you trust me that far? The one who sent you. The old man with the cloak. Kadrin looked at her for a long moment. Lady. He is not an old man. She stared. He has been wearing that face for 7 years. Since the night the king's first mate was killed. Since the night a child was hidden away from the world for her own protection. He chose that face because it was a face no one would look twice at. And he chose that cloak because it was the only thing of hers that he could not bear to bury with her, and he has worn them both, every day, in every gutter and chapel courtyard between here and the capital, because she made him swear he would not stop looking. The rain was loud in the alders. Somewhere far away, the second heartbeat in Sabrina's chest had gone very still, as if it, too, was listening. Looking for what? Kadrin's mouth moved, just a little. It might have been the beginning of a smile. Looking for you, lady. The hunter's hut sat on a low rise of dry ground in the middle of the marsh, walls of peat and stone. Inside, a cot, a small iron brazier, and against the far wall, a cracked mirror the size of a hymnal. Kadrin got the brazier lit and sat down across from her with his back against the door, and waited. Sabrina sat on the edge of the cot and stared at the mirror, the smudge of mud across her cheek. The thin, pale face she had worn for 9 days and 7 years and her entire life. She could also see the silver streak in her hair. It was not gray. It was the bright, clean silver of new metal, and it had been there since the morning her mother had pulled her in front of a polished pan and whispered, "Do not let anyone see this. My heart. Promise me." She had kept that promise for as long as her mother had been alive to ask it of her. She lifted her hand and pulled the silver streak free of the dark. Kadrin did not look at it. He had been very careful not to look at it from the moment he had stepped out from behind the altar, because he already knew it was there. "Kadrin, my name is not Wren." "No, lady, I did not think it was." "Do you know what it is?" "I know the name your mother gave you. I know the name written in the great book of the Crownwood the night you were born, before the book was burned. I have known these names for 9 days. I learned them from a man who has been carrying them in his mouth like coals for 7 years. I will speak any of them you wish, but I would rather, if you will allow it, that you spoke them first." She had not cried in 7 years. She did not cry now. But her hand on the cloak closed slowly into a fist. "My mother called me Little Dove. She said she would give me another name on my 12th birthday. She died the winter before." "Yes." "My aunt told the sisters my name was Sabrina, after the saint of cold rivers." "Yes." "At St. Wilfra's there was an older sister, Sister Halbrin. One night when I was 11, she found me alone in the linen room, and she took my chin in her hand, and she looked at the silver in my hair, and she said, 'They will come for you in the end, child. They always come for the lost ones. Pray that when they come, it is the right ones who find you first.'" Kadrin closed his eyes. "That was Halbrin. She had served your mother since before you were born. She was the one who found a place for you at Wilfra's. Lady, she is dead. She died 8 months ago. I would have spared you that, but you should know." She closed her hand harder. "What is my name, Kadrin? My true name?" He rose, crossed the small dim hut, and knelt in front of the cot, on the cold packed earth of the floor. He placed both his hands, palm up, on his knees. It was the gesture of a sworn man before an unsworn liege. "Your name, lady, is Marenya of the Hollowwood, daughter of Isalora, who was the first mate of the king, granddaughter of the Silver Pact, last living heir of a line everyone in this kingdom has been told, for 7 years, was extinguished in a fire at the summer house at Edenmere. You are not a foundling. You are not Wren. You are the child your mother died to hide. The man who took the cloak from your shoulders by the firewood at Merofen is the man who carried you out of the burning house when you were 10 years old. The man in the iron-gray hood who knelt beside you in the chapel courtyard is the man your mother was promised to from the cradle. And the second heartbeat you have begun to feel inside your chest, lady, is his." The hut was very quiet. She stared past Kadrin at the mirror and watched, very slowly, as the face of a girl named Wren became something else. The silver in her hair seemed brighter. She had always thought her eyes were gray. Now she saw for the first time that they had a faint silver ring at the outer edge of the iris, and that this ring was very, very slowly beginning to widen. "Marenya," she whispered, just to hear the shape of it. The second heartbeat answered, not faster, not louder, only somehow closer, as if a long thread that had been stretched halfway across a kingdom had just been gathered up by another hand at the far end and given a small, careful tug. Somewhere, in a high stone room she could not see, a man in an iron-gray hood lifted his head from a war table covered in maps and went absolutely still. Cadron bowed his head until his forehead almost touched the floor. My lady. By the gray of first light, she made Cadron tell her the rest. Tell me everything. What was burned? Who burned it? What my mother was? Who he is? He did not waste her time with sentiment. Her mother Isilora had been the first true mate of King Valoran of the Crownwood, the seventh of his line. Their bond had been recognized by the wolves of the Silver Pact when they were both children. The Crownwood Council had not approved of Isilora. She was only the daughter of a falconer in a half-forgotten valley, and had spent 6 years trying every legal and illegal means to dissolve the bond. They had failed, because true bonds in the Silver Line cannot be dissolved by any law made by men. So the council had turned to the only other thing that could end such a bond: death. The fire at Edenmere had been set by paid men in livery dyed black for the night. Isilora had died holding her daughter to her chest in a stone alcove off the main hall, and the daughter had not died only because Isilora had wrapped her in a black wool cloak with silver thread along its edges. A cloak that had been a gift from the king on the night of their bonding, worked by old hands in old patterns, with virtues the men who set the fire had not known to account for. The cloak had not burned. The child inside the cloak had not burned. Halrin of the Crownwood Guard, captain of the king's own household, had walked into the burning hall in the small hours after midnight and had carried the child out, wrapped in the unburned cloak, through 3 lines of paid men who did not see him. He had brought the child to a woman named Halbrin. The king had not spoken for 3 days. On the 4th, he had given Halrin 2 orders. He was, from that hour, exiled from every roll and record of the kingdom, on pain of death. And he was to spend every day of his exile finding the child, and never once telling the king where she was, because the council still had its eyes on the king, and any flicker of his attention toward a girl in a far province would be the death of her. He was not exiled in punishment, Savrina said softly. He was exiled in protection. In both, lady, the king has never forgiven him for not reaching the summer house in time. Halrin has never forgiven himself. The king ordered Halrin to keep the cloak on him at all times, as a beacon and a curse. And he said that if Halrin ever found you, he was to put the cloak on your shoulders without asking your name, because the cloak would know. She pressed the wool against her face. The scent of a woman she had never been allowed to remember. And, Valorine, tell me about him. I cannot tell you about him, lady. He is not a thing one tells. The wolves of the Silver Pact have not run with him since the night your mother died, because his bond was broken when she died, and a king of the Silver Line whose bond is broken is a king the wolves no longer answer to. The council has been pressing him every year for 7 years to take a second mate. He has refused, because in the deepest part of himself he has not believed your mother's bond was truly gone. Every spring on the night your mother died, the cloak gives off heat. Bonded wool does not do that when the bond is broken. It has been telling him, in the only way it can, that something of the bond was still alive. Last week, in a chapel courtyard at Merofen, he heard a second heartbeat in his own chest for the first time in 7 years. It is his, she whispered. It is not his. It was your mother's, and through your mother it was yours. The bond you are feeling now is a new thread, lady, made of hers and his, and now yours. The wolves of the Silver Pact will be able to feel it by the next moon. The council within the month. And the woman who burned the summer house 7 years ago, she, lady, will be able to feel it by tonight. The woman. The fire was set by paid men, but the order was given by a hand wearing a silver ring, in a voice that was very quiet and very smooth, and very pleased with itself. The same hand that has spent the last 7 years pushing the king to take a second mate. The same hand that has married into the council itself. He stopped. Lady. Names will draw her to you through the bond. Tell me her name. He closed his eyes. Her name is Lady Idreline of House Varick. She is the king's regent in all matters of state. Last winter the council voted, by her urging, that if the king has not taken a second mate by the next harvest moon, the throne will pass by regency to the woman who has held it in his name. She does not need to wed him. She only needs him to remain unbonded for 2 more seasons. You, lady, are the worst thing that has happened to her in 7 years. In her chest, the second heartbeat went absolutely still, as if the man at the far end had just heard through her the name Idreline spoken aloud, and was now standing in a high stone room very far away with every muscle locked. Then it returned. Faster. Hotter. A thing of fury. Cadron, he is coming. Cadron stood, lifted his sword, and crossed to the window. Then we had better be ready, lady, because he will not be the only one. They came from the south road, 6 of them, before the marsh mist had finished lifting. 6 riders, Cadron said. Varick livery, but the sigil is sewn over. 1/4 of an hour. Less if they break the path. She was already on her feet. The cloak was already across her shoulders. She had no memory of putting it on. But the silver embroidery, when she looked down, was glowing. Only enough that the patterns along the edge had become legible for the first time. She could see the shape of a wolf. She could see the shape of a tree. She could see, woven between them in a script she had never been taught to read, but which her eyes accepted without complaint, a single short word. Marenya. Her own name had been stitched into the hem the night her parents were bonded. She had been wearing it her whole life, and she had not known. Cadron, it is waking. He was looking at her face. The silver ring around her irises had widened again. Her eyes were no longer the eyes of a kitchen girl, but the eyes of something her mother had been. Something the wolves of the Silver Pact would feel in their teeth before the next moon. Lady, stay behind me. If I fall, you go east. Promise me. She did not promise. She put her hand against the small of his back, just for a heartbeat, just long enough that he could feel the warmth of the cloak through his own. He went very still. You will not fall, Cadron. I forbid it. He gave a short, surprised exhalation that might in another life have been a laugh. The riders came on. She did not see most of what happened. A horse's scream, a clipped voice giving an order, the bright clash of metal that had no music in it. The second heartbeat in her chest did not hammer. It waited. Then a voice she had not heard before, close to the door. Inside which, out, or I burn the roof over your head. A woman's voice, clean and calm and educated. She stepped out of the hut. The woman at the door was perhaps 30, in Varick livery, her hair the pale red of autumn copper, bound up in a soldier's knot. A thin scar through her right eyebrow. A crossbow already cocked, already aimed at the center of Savrina's chest. Behind her, 3 of her men were down, and the rest were either fleeing or finished. Cadron was on his knees. There was a dark, wet line down the side of his face. His left arm was hanging wrong. He was alive. There she is, the woman said softly. Isalora's silver. Isalora's eyes. 7 years buried and out walking again. Lady would not believe me without proof. Lady will believe me now. She tightened her finger on the trigger. She did not pull it. Savrina did not know, afterward, how she did what she did next. She had spent her life being told to be small and quiet and unseen, and nothing in being small and quiet and unseen had taught her how to step forward in front of a crossbow, how to speak in the voice that came out of her mouth in that moment. It was a deeper voice, an older voice. The cloak flared with a low silver light as she spoke, and the word she said was not a word in any language she knew, but the woman with the crossbow flinched as if she had been struck. The silver light along the cloak's hem was running now, threading up the wool in long, quick lines like fire moving through dry grass. And somewhere very close, closer than half a day, the sound of a horse being ridden harder than any horse should be ridden was beginning to come through the alders. The woman heard it too. Her face changed. For one heartbeat, Sabrina saw something in it she had not expected. Not hatred, not triumph, but the clean white fear of a soldier who has just realized the thing in front of her is not the thing she was sent to kill. The woman lifted her crossbow again. She did not aim it at Sabrina. She aimed it at Cadrin on his knees. You will tell your lady that the bargain still stands. She comes back to Varric by the harvest moon, or every man in this kingdom who has ever sworn for her dies in a ditch, starting with this one. She pulled the trigger. The bolt did not reach Cadrin. Something passed between them, between one heartbeat of the world and the next, and the bolt was simply gone, turned in the air, shattered against an oak. Sabrina only saw the silver embroidery flare once, very brightly, and felt the breath go out of her body as if a great weight had passed through her ribs and out the other side. The woman in the livery was no longer standing. She was on the wet ground, alive, breathing, her eyes wide and white and fixed on the alders behind Sabrina's shoulder, her lips moving in a word Sabrina did not need to hear to read. Vylorin. Sabrina turned, slowly. The horse came out of the alders first, a great winter dusk gray, lathered to the chest, breaking from a full run as soon as its rider drew rein. He was not wearing the iron gray hood today. His head was bare, dark hair wet with hard riding, and his face, Sabrina saw his face for the first time in her life, was the face of a man who had ridden across half a kingdom in less than a day and a night. His eyes were the color of old amber under deep water. He saw her. He saw the cloak. He saw the silver in her hair. He saw the silver at the edges of her eyes. He took one step toward her. He stopped. He did not seem able to take another. The man who had ridden 2 days in less than one was standing 10 paces from the daughter of his first mate, and he could not, for the length of 3 breaths, make his body move. In the end, it was Sabrina who moved. She did not move into his arms. She did not move to kneel. She moved a single step forward, with the cloak across her shoulders and her mother's name stitched at her hem, and she said the only thing she could think of to say. You are too late by 7 years, she said quietly, but you are not too late. King Valorin of the Crownwood made a sound like a man who had been holding his breath underwater for those 7 years. And then, in the wet grass at the edge of the marsh, the king of the Silver Line went down on one knee in front of her and bent his head, and did not lift it for a very long time. He did not speak, at first. He stayed on one knee with his head bent and his hands open at his sides, and Sabrina understood, watching him, that this was a man who had practiced what he would say to her for 7 years, and that every line of it had just left him at once. Get up, she said. He did not move. My king, get up. The grass is wet. Kedron is bleeding. Your enemy is on the ground at your feet. Get up. He lifted his head. The face she saw was both older and younger than the one in the chapel courtyard. He looked at her as if he was afraid to look at her, and afraid he would stop looking. My lady, forgive me. For what? For all of it. That is too large a thing to forgive at once. Stand up. You will give me the rest piece by piece. He stood. He turned and gave a short, brutal command to the 2 riders behind him, and the woman in the Varric livery was lifted off the ground and bound. Cadrin was lifted as carefully as if he were the king's own brother, eased back against the wall of the hut with a low murmur from one of the riders that meant he will live, sire. Only then did Valorin turn back to her. "My lady, may I come closer?" "Yes." He walked the 10 paces and stopped a careful arm's length away. "You are her image." "I have been told?" "Not her image only. There is something of my own father in the line of your mouth. He had a way of holding it when he was deciding whether to be angry or merciful. You did it just now. It was a small thing. It should not have been the thing that broke her. It was the thing that broke her." She did not cry, but her hand on the doorframe closed slowly into a fist. "You let me grow up in a convent. You let an old woman die alone for keeping my secret. You let a man wear my mother's cloak in every gutter between here and the capital for 7 years. You let the woman who burned my mother sit beside your throne and govern in your name. Why?" "Because I was a coward." She opened her mouth. "No. Hear me. The night your mother died, I had a council of 14 around me who had spent 6 years trying to kill her. I did not know which 7 of them had succeeded. I knew that if I called for you, the next fire would find you wherever I put you. So I sent Halrin away, and I sat very still on the throne for 7 years. And every spring on the night your mother died, I waited for the cloak to tell me you were still alive. I told myself it was strategy. It was strategy. It was also cowardice. I could have moved against the council in any of those 7 years if I had been willing to risk you. I was not willing." Savrina realized that the second heartbeat in her chest was no longer the second heartbeat. It was his heartbeat, beating on the other side of an arm's length of cold morning air, no longer separated from her by a kingdom or a thread or a wall. "I am not my mother. No. I am not what you lost. And I will not be a thing that is asked to forgive what was done to her on her behalf." "No? Then what are you asking of me?" "I am not asking forgiveness. I am not asking the bond. I am asking only this. Let me, for whatever time you will allow it, stand between you and what comes next. Hydraline of Varric will not stop. The council will not stop. The wolves of the Silver Pact have already begun to feel you, and by the next moon they will come, and not all of them will come in friendship. I cannot undo 7 years. I can only put the rest of what I am between you and the next fire, if you will permit it." The silver embroidery on her cloak had begun to glow again. The 2 heartbeats were now beating in the same rhythm. "You will permit a thing first. You will not call me my lady in private. You will call me by my name. The one you and my mother chose for me before I was born." "Yes," he said. He hesitated. "Marenya." The cloak on her shoulders sang. He felt it. Kidrin, against the wall of the hut, lifted his head slowly to watch them. Even the woman in the Varric livery flinched, as if the sound of the name had passed through her like a winter wind. "Then yes, Valorin. You may stand between me and what comes next, for the time being." He bowed. It was not the bow of a king to a subject. It was the bow of a man to the woman he was, slowly and with very great care, beginning to be allowed to love. They did not ride for the capital. Valorin only said, with Marenya seated before him on the winter dusk gray, "We go to Halrin." "Where is he?" "A day's ride east, in the high country above the Hollow Pass. There is a stone shepherd's house there. He has been in it every spring for 7 years, on the night your mother died, because she used to take you there when you were small. You knew where he was." "I have always known where he was, Marenya. I told him I did not, because it was the only mercy I could give him. I have known where he slept every night for 7 years. I just was not allowed to go." She let her shoulder rest, for the first time, against his chest. The 2 heartbeats kept their rhythm. They reached the shepherd's house at dusk. Halrin was waiting in the doorway. He had not put the patched wool back on. He was wearing a clean linen shirt and a dark traveler's coat. His white beard had been combed and his frost-colored eyes were red and tired and not at all surprised to see them. He did not speak when Valorin lifted her down. He only knelt in the doorway of his own house with his palms open on his knees. Halrin, Mirenya said. He did not answer. Halrin of the Crownwood Guard, stand up. He stood. You carried me out of a burning house. Yes, lady. You have worn my mother's cloak for 7 years so that the man who loved her would have one piece of the world left to read. Yes, lady. You let me grow up not knowing my name. Yes, lady. Halrin. I am going to ask one thing only. Is there anything you have not told the king? Anything you have spent 7 years swallowing because you thought it would break him? You will tell it now. To both of us. Halrin stood very still. Then he closed his eyes. There is one thing, lady. Sire. Forgive me. Speak, old friend. The fire at Edenmere was set by paid men, but the door of the alcove where the Lady Isilora was hiding with the child was bolted from the outside. The bolt was clean. There was no soot on it. It was thrown after the fire was lit, by someone who had been inside the house and who left through the kitchen passage as the flames came up. There was a footprint in the ash. A small one. A woman's. There was a piece of pale red hair caught in the splinter of the kitchen door. Valorin's hand on Mirenya's shoulder closed. I did not tell you. You would have ridden out that night and torn the council apart, and the council would have killed you and the child both. I have carried that bolt for 7 years, and there has not been one night I have slept clean. Idrelene of Varick was not on the council yet, the night Edenmere burned. She was a lady-in-waiting to the Lady Isilora. She was Isilora's friend, sire. Isilora trusted her. Isilora let her into the alcove that night. Idrelene came out through the kitchen passage. She left Isilora and the child bolted in. She was the one who threw the bolt. The shepherd's house was very quiet. Halrin, where is the bolt? Under the floor of the room behind me. I have had it for 7 years. Bring it. He brought it, wrapped in a strip of linen that had once been part of a kitchen apron at Edenmere. Old iron, blackened on the inside in the way iron blackens when it has been close to fire and not in it. No soot on the latch end. It would, in front of the assembled wolves of the Silver Pact, and the regency of Lady Idrelene of House Varick before the next moon. If they could reach the wolves alive. How long before she knows? By midnight, Valorin said. Less. And how long before she moves? By dawn she will have called the council. By the noon bell she will have declared me unfit. By dusk tomorrow, she will have the city gates closed. She will produce 3 witnesses who will swear they saw the child Mirenya die in her mother's arms. She has been preparing those witnesses for 7 years. Then we cannot reach the Silver Pact in time. No, the pact is a moon's ride north. Then what? His eyes had gone the color of old amber held against a candle. Then we go to the city tonight, Mirenya, and we walk into the council hall in the morning, with Halrin, with Kadrin, with the woman from the livery, with the bolt, with you, before she has time to put her witnesses in the room. That is a knife thrown into a well to see if it strikes water. Yes. Kadrin lifted his head. Lady. The woman in the livery has the same scar through her right eyebrow as Lady Idrelene's sister, who has been in the southern provinces for 7 years and has not been seen at court. The lady's sister is the one who has been managing the killings, and the one in the livery is her, and Idrelene will not let her sister hang in front of a council hall. Valorin made a low sound at the back of his throat. The sound a wolf makes when, after 7 years of running on 3 legs, it finally sees a path home on 4. Then we have our hostage. Halrin, prepare the horses. We leave within the hour. Mirenya looked down at her mother's cloak. The silver embroidery was glowing again. Her name, stitched into the hem the night of the bonding, was perfectly legible. Then we go. They did not, in the end, walk into the council hall. They were attacked 5 miles short of the city, in the last gray hour before dawn, by 20 riders who came out of a beech wood and did not bother with the pretense of unsewn livery. The Varick crest was bright on every breast. There were 3 crossbows in the first rank. There were 2 blackthorn staves in the second, the long staves carried only by the personal guard of the Lord Regent. They had come to kill because Idreline had decided in the small hours that a corpse in a ditch was easier to explain to a council hall than a living girl with her name stitched into a cloak. Valoran saw them first. He had been listening through her, through the thread, for the soft thrum of strangers' hearts in the trees ahead. He did not warn his men. He simply changed. She had not, in any of the hours since the chapel courtyard, seen him in his other shape. The change came in less than a breath. One moment he was the king on the winter dusk gray, the next, the saddle was empty, and a wolf the size of a small horse stood between her and the trees, his fur the deep red-black of old cedar bark, his eyes the same old amber held against a candle. The wolves of the Silver Pact had not run with him in 7 years. He had remembered how to run alone. The crossbows fired. The wolf was not where they fired. He was 3 paces to the left, and then he was on the lead rider, and the lead rider was on the ground. Cadron was off his own horse with his good arm and his sword. Halrin, who had been carrying a cloak for 7 years and a bolt of iron under a floorboard, drew a sword Marenya had not even known he was wearing, and the old man with the white beard moved into the second rank of riders like a man stepping into a cold river he had been waiting his whole life to swim. Marenya was on the wet ground. She did not remember coming off the horse. She lay flat in the grass with the cloak across her shoulders. The silver embroidery was running with light again, and the second heartbeat in her chest was no longer second and no longer separate, but was hers, beating inside her own ribs at the same hot, terrible speed as Valerine's. Through it she could feel everything he felt, the fury, and the joy, and the cold, sharp clarity of a wolf who had not, in 7 years, been allowed to be what he was. She felt it when one of the blackthorn staves caught him across the ribs, and his breath went out of him, and through the thread she saw for a half-second what he saw, the wet ground tipping, the blackthorn raised again. She rose. She had a paring knife in her pocket and a cloak on her shoulders and her mother's name at her hem, and she rose out of the wet grass with the silver embroidery burning along her arms, and she walked, not ran, walked, toward the man with the blackthorn stave. He turned. He saw her. The face he made was the face the woman in the Varric livery had made in the marsh. The white, clean fear of a sworn killer who has just realized the thing in front of him is not the thing he was sent to kill. He swung the stave at her anyway. The stave did not reach her. The cloak on her shoulders, in the half-light before dawn, opened. Not as a cloak opens when one shrugs it off, but as a thing opens when it has been folded for 7 years and is finally being asked to do the work it was made for. The silver embroidery ran up the wool in a single bright line. The wolf stitched at her left shoulder seemed, for the length of a breath, to lift its head. The tree at her right shoulder seemed to put down a root. The name at her hem seemed to speak itself. And the man with the blackthorn was thrown backward off his feet without anything that Marenya could see having actually struck him, and he hit the trunk of a beech and slid down it, and he did not get up. She walked through the second rank of Varric riders the way a person walks through tall grass. 2 tried to take her shoulder. Their hands could not. For some reason, none of them could afterward explain. Find her shoulder. Another tried to fire a crossbow at point-blank range, and the bolt left the bow and went wide, and the bow itself broke in his hands. She reached Valerine. He was on his side in the wet grass. The blackthorn had bruised something deep. His amber eyes had gone narrow, and the wolf in him was standing at the thin edge of the wolf one becomes when one has spent too long alone. She knelt. She put both her hands on the dark fur at his shoulder. The cloak fell forward across them both. The world did not flash. The world did not sing. The world did, very quietly, settle. The 2 heartbeats slowed together, slowed together, slowed together, until they were the steady walking pace pulse of a wolf and his mate at rest, and Valoran's breathing eased, and the wolf opened his eyes and looked at her with an expression that was no longer a wolf's expression. Up, my king. We are not done. He got up. The fight was over. Of the 20 riders, 11 were down and the rest had broken back into the wood. The lead rider was on his knees, speaking very fast, the way a man speaks when he understands his life is being weighed in front of him. He was telling them where Idreline would be at the noon bell, the names of the 3 witnesses she had hidden in safe houses, and the streets the safe houses stood on. Marenya, we can take her now. No, not now. At the noon bell, Velorin, in the hall, in front of the council, with Halrin beside us, and the bolt in our hand, and her sister bound at our feet. She does not get to die in a beechwood at dawn. She gets to lose her name in front of the men and women she has spent 7 years bending. That is the price. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he bowed his head and gave the order. They rode for the city. The captain of the gate, who had served under Valorin's father, took one look at the king and the cloak and the silver in the hair of the woman wearing it, and he did not ask for the king's papers. He saluted. He stepped aside. He sent his fastest runner ahead through the streets, with a single word for the council hall, a word Valorin had given him in advance. The word was home. By the time they reached the steps of the hall, the streets had begun to fill with people who had not, in 7 years, dared to come out of their houses to see the king ride. Half the wolves of the Crownwood city were standing in the alleys and the side streets and the high windows, their eyes fixed on the cloak across Marenya's shoulders. At the top of the stair, Valerine stopped and turned to her. Last chance to walk away, Marenya of the Hollowwood. You can be on a horse to the Silver Pact within the hour. You do not have to walk into this room. Marenya looked at the closed doors. She looked at her mother's cloak. She looked at the man whose heartbeat was beating in her chest. Valorin, open the doors. He opened the doors. The council hall went absolutely still when they walked in. 14 seats around the long oak table, 11 filled, 2 empty. 1 for the Lord Regent, 1 for the king. The 14th was the seat of the first mate of the Silver Line, and it had not been sat in for 7 years. The Lord Regent, Lady Idreline of House Varick, was on her feet at the head of the table, a roll of parchment in her hand, in the middle of a sentence she did not finish. She was beautiful in a thin and precise way, the way a knife is beautiful. Her eyes went, in order, to Valorin, to Marenya, to the cloak, to Halrin of the Crownwood Guard, whom she had been told for 7 years was a nameless exile dead in a ditch, to Kadrin, to the iron bolt in Halrin's hand, to her sister, bound and gagged, dragged up the steps by the king's 2 men, and finally, slowly, to the cloak again. The hall was so quiet Marenya could hear in the rafters a single pigeon shift its wings. My king, Idreline said very smoothly, we had not expected you. The council was in the middle of a delicate matter of... Sit down, Idreline. He did not raise his voice. The 11 other council members, Marenya watched their faces and saw the moment in each of them when they felt, through the thread, what she was. Sat down. Even the ones who had not been told to. Idreline did not sit. My king, I do not know who this woman is, but you know exactly who she is, Idreline. The cloak knows. The wolves at the door know. Half the people of this city have just felt her in their teeth. Sit down. Idreline did not sit. Halrin stepped forward. He laid the iron bolt in its strip of linen on the long oak table. He laid it precisely in the center in front of the empty seat of the first mate. He did not speak. He was a man whom every person in the room had been told for 7 years was dead, and he was not dead, and he was laying an iron bolt in front of an empty chair. One of the council members, an older woman in the gray of House Merrowind, made a small sound at the back of her throat. Idreline's left hand on the parchment closed. Halrin of the Crownwood Guard, Mirenya said. Tell the council where you found this bolt. He told them. Cleanly, without ornament, where it had been thrown, through which kitchen passage, with which color of hair caught in which splinter. He did not need to name Idreline. My king, Idreline said, and her voice was finally beginning to lose its smoothness. This is theater. Idreline. She stopped. He stepped forward and laid both his hands flat on the wood, on either side of the bolt, and looked at her down the length of the table. And Mirenya felt, through the thread, what was coming out of him. Not rage, but the slow, cold, exact judgment of a wolf who had, after 7 years of being the wrong shape, finally remembered the right one. You bolted my mate into a burning room. You stood at the kitchen passage and listened until you were sure she was no longer screaming. You walked out into the night and you went home, and you brushed the ash out of your hair, and you waited 7 years to tell me it was time I took another. You sat in my council. You held my regency. You moved against my child every winter for 7 winters, and the only reason she is standing in this hall today, Idreline, is that one of my men was a better man than I deserved, and a beggar in a chapel courtyard at Merofen was braver than I have been in 7 years. Stand up straighter, lady, because the thing I am about to do to you, I am about to do in front of your peers. Even now, with the bolt on the table and her sister bound at the door, she was thinking. Mirenya felt the thinking. Idreline had a knife, slim, no longer than a finger, in her left sleeve. Valerin, she said softly. I know. Left sleeve. I know. Idreline moved. She did not move at the king. She moved at Mirenya. The knife came out of the sleeve in a single clean motion, and the Lady Regent of the Crownwood, in the same heartbeat, was halfway down the length of the table on the table itself, in the long, swift, unreal stride of a woman who had also kept a wolf in her chest for 40 years, and had only chosen, until this morning, not to use it. Mirenya did not move. The cloak moved for her. The silver embroidery went up the wool in a single sheet of cold white light. The wolf at her left shoulder lifted its head. The tree at her right shoulder put down its root. Her mother's name at her hem spoke once, very clearly, in the voice that was not quite Mirenya's, and the Lady Idreline of House Varick, halfway down a council table with a slim knife in her hand, was simply stopped in the air. She did not freeze. She did not fall. She was held for one suspended breath, as if a great unseen hand had taken her by the back of the neck, the way a mother wolf takes a cub. In that breath, every wolf in the hall, every wolf in the city, felt the thread. The 11 council members rose without being told. They rose as one. They turned, every one of them, away from the Lord Regent and toward the empty seat of the first mate, and the older woman in the grey of House Merrowind, who had been one of the Lady Isilora's closest friends in the years before Edenmere, said, in a voice that broke once and steadied, My lady, welcome home. Idreline fell. The cloak's hold released her. The knife went out of her hand and skidded the length of the table and stopped at the foot of the empty 14th chair. She did not, this time, get up. 2 of the king's men were already on her. It was over. The reckoning would come in the days that followed. The trial of Idreline before the assembled wolves of the Silver Pact. The removal of 3 council members who had taken her gold. The exile, in the end, not the death. Mirenya would not have her death. The woman who had stood in a kitchen passage and listened to a child's mother stop screaming would be sent, alive, to the cold western islands, and she would live alone in a stone house with a single window. And she would have, every day, the knowledge that she had not won. In the council hall on that morning, there was only Mirenya, and Valerin, and the cloak, and Halrin of the Crownwood Guard standing a half-step behind her with his head bowed and his frost-colored eyes wet in a way they had not been in 7 years. Valerin came around the table. He stopped in front of her. He did not speak. Mirenya unclasped the silver pin at her throat, slowly, and let the cloak slide forward off her shoulders into her hands, and she held it out to him. It is yours. It has always been yours. You gave it to her. She gave it to me. I am giving it back to you, Valorin. Not because I am done with it. Because I would like, now, to wear what you choose to give me, instead of what I was given when I was too small to choose. He took the cloak. He held it for a moment in both hands, the way a man holds a thing he had given up for dead. Then he turned it around and settled it across her shoulders himself, and fastened the silver pin at her throat with his own hands. Then wear it, Mirenya of the Hollow Wood. Wear it as the first mate of the Silver Line, if you will have me. Wear it as my queen, if the title pleases you. Wear it as my wife, if you would prefer the older word. Or wear it, simply, as the woman whose heartbeat has been in my chest since yesterday morning. Mirenya put her hand against his face. The two heartbeats in her chest were one. All of them, Valorin, eventually. But not today. Today I will only wear it home. He bent his head and pressed his forehead against hers, and the wolves of the Crownwood City lifted their voices all at once in a long, low howl that had not been heard in 7 years. Spring came late to the Crownwood that year, but when it came all at once. The River Mara opened with a sound the people of the capital would talk about for years. The wheat in the eastern provinces, which had failed for 3 winters under the Lord Regent's hand, came up green within a fortnight. The wolves of the Silver Pact, who had not run with their king in 7 years, ran now in the long pale dusks along the high country, and the children of the Crownwood, who had not been told the old songs in a long time, began to learn them again at the knees of their grandmothers. Mirenya did not, at first, take the title of queen. She would, in time. She took, instead, the older word. They were married in the late spring, on the high meadow above the hollow pass, in the same place her mother had been bonded before her. There were no witnesses but the wolves and the sky, and Halrin of the Crownwood Guard, who stood in the place of her parents and gave her away with hands that shook only a little. Cadrin stood at Valorin's shoulder, his arm healed, his sword sheathed. The cloak hung on her shoulders, with its silver embroidery, and her name at the hem, and the wolf and the tree. The child came in the autumn of the following year, a girl with dark hair and the silver streak at her left temple already showing, and her father's amber eyes, and a small fierce mouth that held itself, when she was deciding whether to be angry or merciful, in the exact way her grandfather had held his. They named her Isilora. It was Valorin who spoke the name first, the night she was born, with the child sleeping on his chest in the long blue hour before dawn. There were some debts, Mirenya had learned by then, that could not be paid back. There were only debts that could be carried forward, with grace, into a name a small new person would, in her own time, make her own. Halrin of the Crownwood Guard lived to see the child crawl. He died, peacefully, in the stone shepherd's house in the high country, on a summer afternoon, with the door open to the sun, and a sword laid across his knees, and the patched wool cloak he had worn for 7 years folded neatly on the chair beside him. Mirenya rode out from the capital when the news reached her, with the child on the saddle in front of her, and she sat on the floor of the shepherd's house for a long time with her hand on his cold one, and she did not cry, because she had learned by then that there are some sorrows too large for crying and too clean for grief. They are simply carried, the way a cloak is carried, until the wearer has the strength to put them down. She did not put Halrin down. She does not, to this day. The black wool cloak with the silver embroidery hangs, when she is not wearing it, on a hook beside the bed she shares with her king. The pattern at its hem still shifts, sometimes, when the light is low. The scent of wolf smoke and cedar and snow has not faded. Their daughter, when she is old enough to ask, will be told the story of how the cloak came to her mother's shoulders in a chapel courtyard at Marrowfen on the coldest night of a long winter by an old man with frost-colored eyes who said it was only alone. That was, in the end, the truth of it. It was always only alone. A cloak passed from a mother to a man to a beggar to a dying girl to a queen, and back again, in its own time, to the next pair of shoulders that would need it. A thread held across 7 years of silence, a heartbeat kept warm in a chest that was not quite the right chest, until the right chest was, against all of it, found. There are stories the wolves of the Silver Pact tell now, in the long pale dusks, of the night a king in an iron-gray hood rode into a chapel courtyard and saw, on the shoulders of a sleeping girl, the cloak of the woman he had lost, and stopped. He stopped because he recognized the cloak. He stayed because he recognized beneath it the only thing in the world he had ever been certain of. Thank you so much for listening and for staying with this story to the end. I hope it warmed you the way the cloak warmed her. May the next cold night you find yourself in bring an old man with kind eyes, a fire that has been kept lit for you, and someone whose heartbeat, all this time, has been waiting in your chest,